Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Apologies for getting started a little bit late, and a warm welcome to the Red River Métis IPCA's webinar. IPCA stands for Indigenous, Protected and Conserved Areas. So this webinar is jointly hosted by the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, the IISAAK OLAM Foundation, and the Manitoba Métis Federation. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today. My name is Justine Townsend, and I'm joining you from Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Territory in Vancouver, BC. I will introduce you a little bit more to the virtual campfire series and to the specific dialogue that we're having. But before we do that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Elder Joan Church from the Southwest region of Manitoba. She's a board member with the Infinity Women's Secretariat, and she'll be helping to open us up in a good way today. So Joan, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'm not going to ask you to stand. I don't know about the rest of you, but if I stand, you're going to get my torso. You don't need that. So without carrying on too long, I just want to turn this to our Creator and ask our Creator that He guide us through these discussions, through these presentations, that our leaders and our teachers are guided and protected. We ask for our Creator to protect our lands, to protect our heritage, and to help us keep our culture true and strong. Please, Creator, protect each person, guide each person that's in this presentation today. Amen.
Thank you very much, Joan. Much appreciated. Thanks for helping us get started in a good way. Again, I just wanted to welcome everyone in case you just joined. You've just joined us at the Red River Métis IPCA webinar. This is jointly hosted by the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, IISAAK OLAM Foundation, and the Manitoba Métis Federation. So this is our first webinar of the 2022 season. It's part of the virtual campfire series. This is an online dialogue series that's hosted by the CRP. That's the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, and it brings together speakers from territories across the country to share experiences and knowledge about Indigenous-led conservation. So you can find past recordings of webinars that we've hosted on the CRP's website and YouTube channel. This webinar is also being recorded, so you're welcome to share it afterwards. And to learn more about upcoming webinars, please visit the CRP's website. The link is in the chat there. So we have several great webinars in the works coming up. In March, we've got one around International Women's Day. We've also got one on Inuit-led conservation stories coming up. And we'll also be hosting another webinar on additional stories of Métis-led conservation later this year. One of the projects that we're working on at the CRP, and more specifically with IISAAK OLAM Foundation, is called an IPCA Stories Project. And this is an initiative where we're profiling different stories of Indigenous-led conservation. At the moment, we're focusing on Métis and Inuit-led conservation initiatives. And you can learn more about that in the chat as well. There's a link that you can follow. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to speakers from the Manitoba Métis Federation, and we're so pleased to have you all here. And I'll also introduce you to our moderator. So our first speaker will be Minister Will Goodon. Will Goodon has built a career with a combination of community services and entrepreneurship. He has worked for the Manitoba Métis Federation in many capacities. He's held multiple portfolios for the MMF, including Minister of Housing and Property Management, Tripartite Self-Government Negotiations Committee for Housing, etc. And he also continues to work for the Métis governments as a facilitator, consultant, and assembly chair. He's chaired many assemblies for many years for the Métis National Council, the Manitoba Métis Federation, Métis Nation Saskatchewan, and Métis Nation BC. He's also chaired dozens of conferences and assemblies throughout the Métis Nation homeland. So welcome, Will. Thanks so much for joining us. After that, we'll be hearing from Riley Bartel. Riley is the Conservation Coordinator with the Manitoba Métis Federation's Energy, Infrastructure, and Resource Management Department. Riley works on natural resources, lands, and agricultural portfolios. And his work with MMF is centered around engaging with Red River Métis citizens and protecting Section 35 Métis harvesting rights. He's also an environmental professional with a bachelor's degree in environmental studies, and he's worked with various environmental roles, including government, non-government, and the private sector, providing him with diverse work experience he'll be sharing with us today. So welcome, Riley. Thanks for joining us. And following that, we have the pleasure of hearing from Jessica Lagimodière. Jessica joined the Manitoba Métis Federation in 2021 as the Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas Project Officer. And she's a graduate of the University of Manitoba, where she also majored in environmental science. Prior to joining the MMF, Jessica worked for the City of Winnipeg in the Community Services Department, and she recently assisted in the development of a digital spoken version of the Métis Dictionary, Turtle Mountain Dictionary Chippewa Cree. So thanks so much for joining us, Jessica. And then last but not least, we have the pleasure of having Eli Enns join us as the moderator for this panel. Eli Enns is the great-grandson of Nawasam, a historian and public speaker for Wickaninnish, from Chalukwiat on his father's side. On his mother's side, Eli is a second-generation immigrant from the Netherlands, grandson of Peter Enns, and Eli co-founded the IISAAK OLAM Foundation and recently joined the board of directors for the Canadian Committee for IUCN and the Canadian Network of UNESCO Global Geoparks. Eli is a nation builder and Canadian political scientist, and he's focused in constitutional law, geopolitics, and ecological governance. Thanks for joining us, Eli. So each of the speakers today will share some remarks about Red River Manitoba Métis and IPCAs, and then we're going to open up the webinar for questions and discussions. Before we get started, though, I'm going to just briefly turn it over to Christy Tompkinson. She's a knowledge mobilization specialist with the CRP, and she's going to give us some tips on how to navigate the Zoom webinar platform and how to ask your questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Christy.
Thanks, Justine. Hello and welcome, everyone. For many of you who have come to previous virtual campfire webinars with the CRP, you'll notice that things are just a little bit different. We're trying out a new platform here on Zoom. And so you're all automatically muted. Unfortunately, we can't see your faces, but we do encourage you to interact and contribute in various ways on this platform. So you can see that the chat function is still there, and we'd love to see your questions and comments, and especially we'd love to know where you're joining us from today. If you have questions throughout the session, there's a Q&A function. It's at the bottom. There's two little speech bubbles. It says Q&A, and you can pose your questions there anonymously, or you can use your name as well. And panelists can answer those questions live, or they can answer them throughout the session as they're speaking as well. If you would really like to speak and pose your question verbally, you can also raise your hand. There's a raise hand function at the bottom. It's just a hand, and we can unmute you, and you can share your question that way as well. And before we start, I wanted to share a little survey just to understand a little bit more about where you're coming from and your knowledge about IPCAs. We just have a few questions here with this link I just shared in the chat. And also, before we start, we'd just like to say hello, welcome. If you can introduce yourself in the chat and which territory you're joining us from today, that would be great. And so from there, I'll send it back to you, Justine. Thanks so much, Christy.
That's great. Yeah, so again, welcome everyone. We're so happy you all joined us today. We're very grateful to all of our panelists and to Joan and to Eli for moderating. So without further ado, I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Minister Goodon to get us started. And yeah, take us away, Will. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say a big thanks to my friend Joan for the opening prayer. In almost all Indigenous cultures that I know of, elders are held in really high esteem. And Joan is one of those people who I consider to be a friend, but also someone who I can go to for advice and help whenever I'm struggling with things. And thankfully, she lives right in Brandon here, and I don't have very far to go, but it's great to see her here. Excellent choice to ask Joan to help us open this important topic and discussion in a very good way, and much appreciated. Of course, big thanks to my friend Eli, who has taught me so much over the years. We call each other brothers, and I don't think that is an exaggeration. I consider him one of my closest friends, but also one of my best teachers in a lot of different areas. And of course, I want to say thank you to Justine and Christy. You guys doing a bang up job. So far, things are just smooth as satin, and I'm just really looking forward to the discussion here today. And of course, Jessica and Riley, great to have you here. You're the ones who know what's happening on the ground, so to speak, and I'm so happy that the Manitoba Métis Federation is making some serious headway on these protected areas. Just real quickly here, everybody can hear me okay? It's my sound is fine. Just want to double check, because sometimes I don't know. I got a hat from our Métis Women Infinity Women's Secretary. It says you're on mute, so I should have been wearing that, because a lot of times you're talking and all of a sudden it's like, hey, you're not talking to anybody here. You're just talking to yourself. So it's all good. But I do have some notes that I'm going to be working from, but I will probably stray off those and go on a tangent a little bit. And a lot of that will have to do with the work that I was so fortunate to be involved with when I first met Eli through the Indigenous Circle of Experts, and how this idea of protected areas managed by Indigenous peoples was starting to, percolate in the Canadian consciousness. And at that time, this idea wasn't really thought of inside the Métis Nation world, but now it is. And I want to say a big thanks to ICE for welcoming the Métis Nation in and considering those ideas that we brought to the table in a way that wasn't just like a rubber stamp. It was like real listening and real understanding. And because a lot of times, and this doesn't happen just in this particular area, but happens in many different areas where the Métis are just sort of an afterthought. It's like, okay, we're doing this for Indigenous people. Oh yeah, we should probably bring in the Métis, or sometimes they even forget to bring us in. But that wasn't the case here, and we were brought in as full partners, and we're very excited to be here. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit here, because there's probably a lot of Métis Nation citizens who are listening, but there's probably some others who aren't maybe as aware of who we are. And I think I'm going to chat a little bit about that, a little bit about myself, a little bit about the work that we've done. And then Jessica and Riley are going to dig a little deeper into what's happening inside our Métis government. I don't necessarily want to bring up some of the internal issues that's going on in the Métis Nation, although those may pop up, and I'm not worried about having those discussions. If you're a Métis Nation citizen, you're a Métis Nation citizen, and that's what's really important at the end of the day. And we all know, for us, for all Indigenous peoples, but for us, the land is such an important thing. Land has been, you go back to the days of Cuthbert Grant, Louis Riel, and how Louis Riel negotiated land into the Constitution for the Métis through the Manitoba Act. That's how important he saw it then, and I think it's as important now as it was back in those days, not just for economic reasons, but for community reasons, for spiritual reasons, for emotional reasons. That connection. I grew up on the land and in the Turtle Mountains in southwest Manitoba. And, as a little kid, I'd run around in the bush and in the lakes, and, we went swimming, we went fishing, we went trapping and hunting. And my dad taught me, why this deer track was fresh and this one wasn't. Those kinds of things, that connection is such an important thing for me, which is why I guess I feel so passionate about this topic. That was a long diatribe, but I'll try to be a little bit more succinct as I move through here. So I just want to say again, thank you to everyone, IISAAK OLAM, for an invitation for us to participate. It means really a lot to our Métis government for that. Just wanted to say also to the CRP, this is again, it's such an important topic, and we feel honored to be a part of the conversation. As was mentioned, my name is Will Goodon. I am the Minister of Housing and Property Management. You're probably asking yourself, why is the Minister of Housing talking about this? Well, I love being the Minister of Housing, and we are doing some incredible things here in Manitoba for our citizens. But at the same time, because of my work with ICE, I have had a hard time letting go of this topic, because I feel it's such an important thing that I just keep wanting to put my stamp on it let's move forward and get something done, because land is that connection that we need. We were called the road allowance people for many, many years because we had no land. We had no place to live. We had no place to build our houses. So we literally built these shacks on the side of the road, on the road allowances for generations. And that's, I think, another reason why land has become such a symbolic idea for the Métis Nation. So what I'm going to be talking about today is to provide a little bit of background on the Manitoba Métis Federation, discuss what it means to be Red River Métis. Now, you may have noticed a little bit of a shift in how the Métis Nation describes itself. And that being said, because, and I'm not going to get into this, but there are and there is a lot of identity theft happening for Indigenous peoples across North America, quite honestly, and in Canada in particular, and in the Métis Nation seems to be a target, because people think Métis means mixed. If you've got an ancestor from 13 generations ago, that makes you somehow Métis. And we are trying to be very certain about who we are as Métis, and that's why we're trying to use descriptors like Red River Métis so that people understand that we have a geographic homeland. We have distinct language, culture, food, dance, clothing, you name it, all the markers that make us a distinct people. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about that. I want to talk a little bit about how we're jumping into the IPCA arena and what we're doing in there. And then I'll also want to talk a little bit about some of the other things that are sort of raising their head a little bit. And I'm open for questions. Of course, we want to keep it to the IPCA forum, but if there's like a really sticky question about Métis issues, Métis identity, I'm open for that. It's not a problem. Very well. That's another thing that I do is nationhood and protect the nation. I've been doing that for many years now, very vocal on that. So it's not a problem if people have questions on that as well. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Manitoba Métis Federation is the democratically elected self-government representative of the Red River Métis. We recently signed a self-government agreement, the only one of its kind across Canada, that recognizes the MMF as a government now. There are other agreements, but they are discussion documents to talk about how there will be self-government at some point in the future once negotiations happen. But the MMF has that now. Just a little bit about the organization of the MMF. So you heard the introduction of our elder who is from the Southwest region. Now the MMF is divided into 7 regions. Southwest is where I'm from, and that's where I'm elected from, and I represent politically. But there is the Thompson region, the PA region, Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, Interlake, and Winnipeg regions. So we have 3 representatives elected from each region. So that's 21 elected representatives. We also have sitting on our cabinet the Infinity Women's Secretariat spokesperson, and she is a full member of cabinet. In fact, she probably has the most powerful portfolio as the Minister of Finance. And then, of course, we have our president, who is elected province-wide. So that's what makes a 23 member cabinet that is entrusted to manage the affairs of the Métis Nation and the Red River Métis. So within these regions, though, we also have what we call locals, and they're basically community associations. They're the grassroots. They're the ones who are doing the Métis Days in their community, where they bring in music and dance and food and get-togethers, and it's the cultural heartbeat of the Red River Métis. And if you ever come, and I would encourage you to come to a Métis event, there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of a lot of laughter, a lot of teasing. So if we tease you, you know you're okay. If we don't, then we might not. So I tease Eli all the time, just so you know, because I make sure I can give it to him. He gives it back, but so he's more than a part of our community as well. In those, one of the other things that we are very active in is to protect the rights, claims, and interests of the Red River Métis. Now, that could be anything from healthcare. As we know, in this pandemic, there's been a lot of issues. The Red River Métis have had to fight for the ability to protect our citizens, especially in the beginning of the pandemic. We were once again left out, forgotten about. But of course, our president, David Chartrand, is a larger than life personality. He went to bat for all of us, and we are now, I believe, considered to be one of the leading Indigenous governments in protecting our citizens from the economic impacts, from the health impacts, and we're just very excited about that. I did talk a little bit about the Red River Métis, but as the Manitoba Métis, as a part of the larger Métis Nation, we have asserted our our rights as a distinct Indigenous collective. We have a homeland, we share a language. I talked about that before, but Michif is the language that we use. It's a language that is a little bit of, you could call it a hybrid, but it's more than that. In fact, there are linguist scholars from Europe, from Japan, who have come to study and actually write articles and books about the distinctiveness of the language, that it's not just a little, it's not just a hybrid language. It's more than that. It became its own language, which I think is very important to point out. We have national symbols, and I should say practically all of them, these symbols are derived from the history in the Red River area, including our infinity flag, including a lot of times you'll see on our clothing, the flower beadwork when you travel across North America, almost all peoples have a very distinctive beadwork style, and you can tell who is a part of the Red River Métis by the distinctive red flower beadwork that's a part of us. Of course, we have our culture, our music. If anyone has heard the fiddle, you know the toes get tapping. I believe Eli may have even been forced to go on the dance floor when we had an event in Winnipeg a few years ago. You know, I'm as good a dancer as him, which is not that good. So, but it's all a part of who we are. And one of the other things that we have done, and I think that have really set the stage, is the harvesting collective, harvesting rights that we have asserted, we fought for through the courts. Of course, there's the Powley case in Ontario, but it's not necessarily, it was described as a Métis rights case, but it was, Powley himself wasn't Métis, but the principles in the Powley case at the Supreme Court are absolutely applicable to what we have asserted here in Manitoba. Just so you know, I did shoot a duck in 2004, and there's no one on here to dispute this, but it was a really good shot. And we went through 4.5 years of court, and we won the right to harvest according to our laws. And we did set up our own laws in order to have not just, and Eli and I have talked about this for years. It's not just the rights that we need to demand, but also the responsibilities that we need to take upon ourselves. And that's what the laws of the Métis Hunt are all about. And I think that's what the underlying foundation of IPCAs is all about as well. We have a right to the land, but we have a responsibility to protect it and to make sure that it's there for future generations. Because what is the point of winning a right to hunt if there are no moose at the end of the day? That is kind of pointless. And I'm sure most of us here today can agree on that. A few of the other things that we're doing here, and I'm sure Jessica and Riley are going to talk about it, the Métis Guardians program, something that I was very, very excited to push through at the MMF and at the Canada level. Really, really excited. That gets our young people on the land, gets them to understand how the beavers work in the creeks, how the fish move from lake to lake, how the trees are growing, what happens when there's a forest fire. Like those kinds of things are, I think, really important. I want to see us do more of it, but the fact that we're doing it is fantastic, and I'm really excited about it. We do community-based climate monitoring, and that really helps when someone like myself gets to go to the COP for the UN climate change. Those things that we're doing, again, on the land is really, really important, and not only gets our people involved, but just the voice of the Métis Nation then becomes active in this global discussion about climate change. One of the things I personally, I mean, all these things are important to me personally, but we are also jumping on the bandwagon when the Prime Minister announced 2 billion trees. The MMF also committed to that goal and is working towards 2 million trees. This is, again, a little aside, a little tangent. You'll find me doing that. One of the things that I've done since university is to take trees that are going to be chopped down in the ditch, in the lawnmower, by the big lawnmowers. Before the lawnmower gets there, I dig them out and I sell them to farmers, ranchers, landowners, and something I've been doing for a long time. It helps me with a little bit of spending money, but it also, it puts trees, and I would say with conservative numbers that I'm responsible for at least 50,000 trees out there that would have been mowed to the ground if it wasn't and I dig them out with a shovel. You know, my dad passed away recently, but he was out there up until he was like 85, I think, helping dig trees out of the ditch, and that's a really exciting thing. And then of course we have the Métis Environmental Leaders of Tomorrow. Like that is this is a youth program that we've got running at the MMF, and it's a really exciting thing. And maybe Jessica and Riley can touch a little bit on that as well. Real quickly, we talked a little bit about me being the Minister of Housing. Now there's a lot of things going on there. We've got affordable housing. We do a lot of seniors housing. We're doing a whole lot of more builds this year for seniors, and they're very specifically for our elders. Some of the ideas are where the outlets are, where the how you can maneuver in a wider hallway or bathroom because you might be in a wheelchair. Those are really important. And of course, we have our first-time homebuyers program. I believe, I'm going to touch on these numbers here, 600 new homes for Métis families in Manitoba in the last 2 years. We have our repairs program. We have, I think, repaired over 400 homes, and we have 1,100 on the waiting list. There's just a lot of things happening there. But again, like I said, I will always take time for this topic. So real quickly, again, going back to what made me be, and I believe I don't like to describe myself this way, but a champion for IPCAs is the time when I was appointed to the Indigenous Circle of Experts. Now, as we know, the IPCAs and the Indigenous Circle of Experts was the response that Canada had to targets on conservation, international targets, and they developed something called the Canada Pathway to Target 1, which is protecting as much land as possible. First of all, it was 17%. Now we're at 25 by 2025 and 30% by 2030. And the Métis Nation, the River Métis, wants to do their part. And that's why we're jumping in on this bandwagon to not only to protect for us, but to protect for the global community. And I think that needs to be underlined as well. So one of the key features of IPCAs that we've been pushing through is that it be Indigenous initiated. And part of what we're doing is, at least in the Métis homeland, we know that we share the land. We assert our homeland, but we also know that we have relatives, First Nations relatives on the land as well. And we are doing our utmost to bring those that leadership in as partners. It's not always been reciprocated, but we know that it's important that that happen as well. The long-term commitment to conservation is absolutely vital. When we look at IPCAs, they're not that bubble, like, we see, sometimes the parks are put into a place where you can look, but you can't touch. And that's not what the Métis want. And one of the things that we're going to be talking about is the Kettle Hills in Manitoba, otherwise known as the Blueberry Patch. Well, if we were to tell Métis people that you can look at the blueberries, but you can't touch them, we would have a revolution on our hands. So and it's more than just blueberries, but that's just an example of the way that we will manage these IPCAs. And that's an important thing to understand, is that the land is going to be managed by Indigenous peoples, for Indigenous peoples, and of course partnering with all Canadians, and in Manitoba, Manitobans as well. And of course, we need to have this, again, going back to this idea of rights and responsibilities for the Métis Nation, that we want those things to be at the forefront. It's a very exciting time. I'm excited to be here. I probably talked too long already, but we are very, very excited to be here. I am excited to listen to what Riley and Jessica have to say. I'm finished for now. I believe that we do have a video that Riley's going to put up here, and that'll be a really good jumping off point for Riley and Jessica to jump into the next topics here. So let's take it away.
Thanks a lot, Will. Wonderful to hear your words as always. And Will, for the audience, Will played a very important role, not only in the proceedings of the ICE committee, but in the formation of the foremost narrative. And the duck that Will mentioned, that we call it the duck with the infinity flag tied to its tail feathers in the foremost narrative, inspired and continues to inspire many Indigenous peoples to just believe in themselves and take it upon ourselves to govern those cultural keystone species and such. So thank you so much, Will, for those words. And over to Riley and whoever's got the play button for the film.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen here and share some of the work we did this past summer in the Kettle Hills Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area.
What we're doing here today is we're putting out plots in the burn and in the green to show in 2, 3, 4, 5 years how wherever the burn is, the blueberries will come back in abundance comparing to where we're not burnt in the green areas with all the canopy, and the blueberries will quit growing eventually.
So we've got our little veg plot here to take our little sample set of the vegetation in this area. We're going to go through and identify all the species that we can identify. If we don't know a species, then we're going to go back to our plant identification books and reference them and find out what we missed. And we're mainly focusing on the competition to the blueberry bushes and just identifying the prevalence of the blueberry regeneration in this area because it's a burn site. And so this will be our first little sample set, gathering some baseline data, and hopefully we'll be able to come back year after year and see how well the blueberries are regenerating.
This here is part of the Kettle Hills. We've been burning, having control fires through these areas, like I said, for 1,000 years. And when you burn every so often, what happens is all the undergrowth underneath, you get rid of all the canopy and you get rid of a lot of grasses that carry the bugs and the worms that stall the blueberries from growing and actually kill them.
It's got some edges. Yeah, it does have some edges. Nice. Sedges have edges. There is some lichen, yeah. Got some, yeah, feather moss. Water birch? Oh, maybe. Wait, which? Oh, that's dwarf birch. Yeah. Oh, that one? Yeah, that's dwarf birch.
Years ago when I was younger, I'd come up through here, from here to the Kettle Hills, which is where the kettle stones are, closer to the Swan Lake. Especially around the end of July and early August, it'd be nothing to see anywhere from 300 to 1,000 people up here picking berries and camping. This whole area used to become just like a little community all over.
And so now that we've identified most of the species, I would say we can determine the percentage cover in the plot. Blueberry. 6%.
So at each of these vegetation plots, we take a GPS waypoint. So this one's labeled Cowan number 2, and that's so we know exactly where to go next year when we come back and assess the prevalence of blueberries.
You know, Métis people have been saying, First Nations people have been saying for years that forest fires are really, really beneficial, not only to the jack pines because they have the serotinous cones and the fire opens it up and the seed is dispersed that way, but also for the blueberries as well.
We'd bring our prospector tent and our family. We'd usually stay for about a week. And that was always around the first week of August, and that's when the berries are in their most abundance. And so, like I say, but it's been generation after generation after generation. We've been here, but always have been here.
Perfect. Site assessment done.
Got me craving blueberries for sure. Throw some in the yogurt later.
Just want to make sure you guys can see my screen here. Can everyone see this presentation? Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, so that was a video kind of our field work this past summer in the Kettle Hills Indigenous Protected and Conserved area. It's conserved area, and it's a good segue kind of into Jessica and my portion of the presentation. So again, I'm Riley Bartel, and I'm the conservation coordinator with the Manitoba Métis Federation's Energy Infrastructure and Resource Management Department. And kind of like Minister Will Goodon mentioned, Jessica and I are going to present on some of our IPCA work to date, showcase some more of our recent field work, and talk about some of our IPCA next steps. So this map here outlines the entire province of Manitoba and where the MMF's IPCAs are situated within the province. So a little background on the MMF IPCAs. So we're working on creating 2 Indigenous protected and conserved areas in Manitoba. The first IPCA is in our northern MMF Thompson region near West National Park. And then the second IPCA, it's within the MMF's northwest and the PAW regions, and called the Kettle Hills Blueberry Patch IPCA. So the Thompson region IPCA, it's within a very remote area within Manitoba, within Manitoba's northern transition forest, and comprised entirely of unoccupied crown land. There's actually this is an area where there's 3 different populations of caribou, and the populations overlap. And caribou use this area as a migration corridor, as well as wintering habitat. It's also inhabited by a variety of different species at risk that Jessica's going to touch on. And in terms of importance to Métis citizens, it's also an area with a rich contemporary and historical Métis land use and occupancy on the land. So this would include kind of fishing, pickerel and trout fishing primarily, as well as big game harvesting such as caribou and moose, big game hunting as well, a lot of ptarmigan hunting in this area, trapping, gathering, as well as a variety of different access roads in this area as well. And then, yeah, the second proposed protected area that's within Manitoba's lowlands and called the Kettle Hills Blueberry Patch IPCA. This is an area that's extremely significant to the Manitoba Métis. It's referred to as the Métis breadbasket region because it's sustained Red River Métis for generations. It's located within an area where there's a concentrated population of citizens kind of living within a network of settlements, villages that span these two regions. And many citizens live elsewhere, but come home to the Métis breadbasket to hunt, fish, trap, and gather and be on the land with their families. But it's actually an area that's facing a tipping point. The breadbasket is now facing ever increasing amounts of pressure from development, urbanization, as well as infrastructure and forestry license projects, transmission line projects, as well as kind of encroaching agriculture practices, as well as overharvesting, which put additional strain on this area, and an area that's already suffering under the weight of cumulative impacts. So it's actually, unfortunately, an area subject to a large decline in big game population that Métis citizens rely on for hunting, and it's actually currently under a moose conservation closure. So moose has been identified as a priority species to monitor in this IPCA initiative. So these two IPCAs, they're very different. You have the Thompson region IPCA that consists of unoccupied groundland, and then you have the Kettle Hills IPCA with a variety of land title designations like community pasture land, provincial forest, game bird refuge, provincial park, as well as privately owned feasible land. So a lot of the work that Jessica and I have done too is mapping out the different land titles in this area. And this is extremely important because Métis harvesters in Manitoba don't have that protected or guaranteed reserve land base to harvest on. They rely on crown land and private land with permission to harvest. So getting into some of the work completed to date, first, within the IPCA initiative, we built capacity within our Métis government and hired staff to work on this project. We started off our initiative conducting interviews and literature reviews from other existing IPCAs. And that was to gather advice and lessons learned from other Indigenous nations, as well as research involved in studying and establishing and managing IPCAs. And this was in an effort to not reinvent the wheel and allowed us to pull from existing resources. So kind of from this literature review, we were able to get a bit of a sense of the different IPCA governance and management structures out there. And we presented this information to Métis citizens. And this diagram kind of outlines the different IPCA governance and management structures out there. So towards the left, you have a more Crown-governed IPCA where Indigenous communities are more of an advisor, and then towards the right, you have a more Indigenous-led governance and management structure to the IPCA. So to date, we've held a variety of different in-person and virtual workshops, and that's to ensure these IPCAs are built on Métis values, knowledge, as well as priorities. So some of the questions we ask at these engagement sessions include asking citizens to map out the proposed boundaries, identifying preferred governance and management structures, as well as identifying what citizens want to protect in these IPCAs. Another question is we asked at these engagement sessions was, what can the MMF do to care for our protected lands? And then we also use these engagement sessions as a way to identify acceptable uses in our IPCAs as well. Another aspect that we've prioritized is nation-to-nation engagement and developing collaborative relationships with surrounding Indigenous nations. There are actually 5 proposed IPCA projects in Manitoba's north, including the MMF's projects. So connecting and building relationships to further understand each other's goals and priorities has been extremely important. So this graphic is actually from the Churchill Beyond Borders workshop, which was an opportunity where Indigenous nations, as well as government and academia, to discuss caribou management, as well as discuss kind of proposed protected areas and work underway, and actually saw some of our Parks Canada colleagues that were on this, basically ran this engagement session. So nice to see everyone here too. One challenge that we've definitely experienced with the development of our IPCAs was COVID. So we started our work on the IPCA initiative right around the time restrictions started coming in. So typically when the MMF meets with our citizens, we gather all 7 regions together and have a large meeting and discuss the file. So this had to be adjusted, and a way to kind of continue to bring awareness to the IPCA initiative, but also adhere to public health protocol was the development of an online survey for citizens to voice their perspectives, priorities, and enthusiasm. So we held an IPCA online survey contest at the beginning of this fiscal year to discuss IPCAs, and it included a referral raffle prize. So we'd heard from citizens, but we also had citizens reach out to their friends and family to bring more awareness to the IPCA initiative. So I'm going to pass it off to Jessica, and Jessica's going to touch on some of our survey results to date and touch on some of our field work as well as our IPCA next steps.
Hi, everyone. So through the survey, we asked Métis citizens to share their opinions and on relationships, governance, and management structure in the creation of the Métis-led IPCAs. This is just a little snapshot of some of what we heard. First of all, legal protection is a priority in the IPCAs. Our Métis citizens hold very vital traditional knowledge. We were also able to derive a list of species of importance in each IPCA, and we identified that there's widespread concern over the ecological changes that are occurring in the traditional territories across the Red River Métis homeland. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each IPCA individually and some of the work we've done there. In the Thompson region, we focused on engagement, collaboration, management and governance planning, as well as defining that IPCA boundary. Specific to the Thompson region, we've been focusing on the species at risk, as Riley mentioned. These include woodland caribou, polar bear, wolverine, rusty blackbird, and olive-sided flycatcher. Through Manitoba's Conservation Data Center, we're in the process of pulling some of the exact locations of species at risk occurrences, and this will further help in our delineation of the boundary. Another resource we've been using is the traditional land use and occupancy data that we have in our database. Through this, caribou have become the focal species. They, due to ecological and cultural significance, we've identified there are a few herds of importance in this area. There's the Cape Churchill caribou herd, which is part of the Eastern migratory caribou, as well as the Beverly herd that migrates from Nunavut, and as well as the boreal caribou, woodland caribou that inhabit the boreal woodland in Manitoba and across Canada. This image here is of particular importance. It's an original piece by Myrtle DeMills, who is a notable Métis woman. She was a talented artist who resided in Manitoba in Churchill. She created a whole series of art sculptures from caribou hide. So this fiddle is actually constructed from the hide of a caribou. Her artwork was an expression of the respect for the species and the importance it is to many nations, not just the Métis, but of course the other First Nations, as well. So the Thompson Region IPCA, as a result of the Beyond Borders Caribou Workshop, a collaborative team of academic researchers, Parks Canada staff, and Manitoba Métis Federation staff came together over the shared goal related to the Cape Churchill caribou herd. So in 2021, MMF staff, Nicole Njitsky, who you saw in the lovely video earlier, and myself were graciously hosted by the Parks Canada staff to assist in the installation of their trail camera network. This was along the fens and beach ridges in Wapusk National Park that are utilized as a transportation network for caribou to allow them to access their summer grounds in Wapusk National Park. So the Thompson Region IPCA will result in a corridor that connects the summering and wintering grounds of the species of caribou. And a little bit about the Kettle Hills Blueberry Patch. Some of the work we've done to date on the ground, we've done visits, medicinal plant identification, flora and fauna monitoring, and sharing traditional knowledge. So I'll get into each of these a little bit. Okay, so from our workshops, what we heard that there's a widespread concern in the reduced abundance of blueberries in the Kettle Hills. So in August 2021, MMF staff, youth, and knowledge holders all gathered in the Kettle Hills. We were able to collect information on the priority species we had identified through our engagement process and on the lack of accessible blueberries. So the two-day event that we hosted, during this period of time, we maintained trails, we collected information on blueberries, and we identified medicines such as Seneca root. We were also, it was very impactful for us to be able to engage with traditional knowledge holders such as Bob Church, who shared stories related to the Kettle Hills, the medicines that are growing there, and the significance of the area. So here's an example of the visual vegetation analysis we performed while in the Kettle Hills. You've seen this in the video earlier as well. So our knowledge holder, Bob Church, spoke about the use of fire on the land by Métis and First Nations. So in this plot, we collected data on a recently burned area to establish a baseline post-wildfire. We have a goal to return each year and document the interaction that occurs between wildfire and the prevalence of blueberries in the Kettle Hills that reflects what our knowledge holders and elders are telling us. In this 1 meter by 1 meter section, you can see that even just a few months after a wildfire has passed through, fireweed flowers are blooming and other early successional plant species have begun to establish themselves. Here, we also collected data on the productive area of the Kettle Hills Blueberry Patch. We were able to identify blueberry species. There are two known species that grow in the Kettle Hills Blueberry Patch, the velvet leaf and the low bush blueberry. So this is actually low bush, mostly in this one. So we were able to establish a baseline in order to monitor ongoing changes, monitor vegetation competition that may be impacting blueberry growth or the fitness of the blueberry species there. We observed the blueberry patch for signs of disease or pest damage, which was particularly difficult because there are no commercially grown wild blueberries in all of Manitoba. So there's not much data that really exists on the species that may be impacting or pests and diseases that are impacting blueberries in Manitoba. So, you know, we did as much research as we could to identify which pests we may find. And what I found out was reinforced kind of what our elder Bob was teaching us, that through his ecological knowledge, the control method for many of the pests and diseases that may impact wild blueberries is the use of fire. So fire sterilizes the above ground portion of the plant where disease and insects and pests are often found, while the root system remains intact. So in this plot, in this plot, there's primarily low bush blueberries. They're not experiencing any issues with competition, and we didn't see any signs of pest damage or disease. But unfortunately, due to other environmental factors, such as the drought we were experiencing in Manitoba last year, we didn't observe any blueberry yield. Here's the team we went out with. This field work took place in partnership with the MMF's MELT program, Métis Environmental Leaders of Tomorrow. Our coordinator, Amber Chambers, is here, as well as Taylor Fleming and Ainsley Martin, who are from the Guardians program. Minister Goodon mentioned earlier. So our field work was really, we really appreciate, it was a great time. We were able to share traditional knowledge of the area. We brought together youth and knowledge holders together on the land to foster intergenerational knowledge transfer. So this work that we did is informing the creation of materials related to a flora and fauna monitoring program, as well as an online survey tool for Métis citizen scientists to utilize. Which brings us to the work we have in progress. This is some of the stuff we have upcoming. Next week, actually, we're conducting a community cultural values mapping exercise. This is a form of traditional knowledge gathering interviews that occur in a group setting. We're going to be using the knowledge we obtain here from elders and knowledge holders to collect, we're going to be collecting information on cultural and ecological significance, as well as potentially Michif language, place names that could be related to the Thompson region IPCA specifically. And then also coming up is our carbon offset mapping and calculation. So we're doing this in the Kettle Hills and Thompson IPCA. This is a form of spatial analysis based on the estimates of carbon stocks in plants and soil using satellite, climate, and topographic data. This is going to allow us to quantify with a fairly high degree of certainty the amount of carbon sequestration occurring by ensuring these areas remain protected and intact. And hopefully this summer, we are looking forward to the release of the online survey tool for flora and fauna monitoring. This one's occurring with the support of Nature United. It's focusing on the Kettle Hills IPCA and similar habitats. So we're in the process of creating this monitoring strategy. It's targeted at blueberries and other key species. When this tool is ready, we're going to be educating citizens, providing field manuals, and teaching them how to use the survey tool. It'll be accessible online through your cell phone, and MMF staff will be able to access the observations and utilize them to create reports and inform decision-making. Finally, of course, very important is a validation meeting where we will be presenting our survey results to citizens to ensure the accuracy and that they reflect the Red River Métis citizen values. Next steps are to finally delineate the boundary of each IPCA, identify the priority areas and goals for each IPCA, continue to explore collaboration opportunities, and continually engage with the surrounding nations on these areas.
Wonderful. So that's the end of your presentation there, Jessica? I'm assuming so.
Yes, sorry.
Okay,
That's the end. We should have had an end slide. Questions, please.
No.
I'm just gonna do that with my hands instead.
Lovely. No,
Yeah.
Good job. Wow, what a top-notch team you have there, Minister Goodon. Yeah, thank you, Riley and Jessica. We have a few questions coming in. There was one that was asked directly on the chat to the host and panelists from Jared Whalen. And I don't know if Minister Goodon's answer went out to the whole group. So I'll ask the question, Will, you can speak to a little bit. Jared asked about engaging with First Nations in and around, and I think that was spoken to a little bit in the presentation, but maybe if you want to just expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that one slide that Riley had there showed exactly what we're doing, working with other Indigenous nations around both IPCA areas. And, that was something that we were you know, a lot of times we get into silos, and I think it's important for us to have a good understanding of who is all out there, but in particular, other Indigenous rights holders. And I think I could speak for the whole team here that that's important for us. But we also have to reflect and say that it's important when it's the other way around as well, because that doesn't always happen when we're invited to participate in initiatives that may affect where we are and how we practice our culture and our rights in certain areas. So we want to be lead by example by bringing people in, but I think it's also important that other Indigenous nations invite us in to be part. And that's why I think the example that Eli and all of our friends in ICE at that time was such an important thing for us to collaborate and have all those voices. But just wanted to sort of throw that out there, that the road does go both ways. We are willing to lead by example, but we're hoping that when that happens, that we're invited to the table as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, you know, the guidance from the elders during the ICE process, you know, has stayed with us and really manifested in this idea of we rise together. And that, you know, like you said earlier, if we're busy fighting over rights and not taking care of our responsibilities, we'll be at the end of the day, you know, robbing our grandchildren of a future. Question I have to the team is around cultural keystone species, and this is a bit of a historical. There's a historical element in this as well, and it's right in the Manitoba Métis Federation logo, the bison. And I'm wondering, obviously the bison have been very much interfered with, and there's a kind of species genocide that has been reported on of the mass killing of bison. And I know it's a very important part of the history of the Manitoba Métis Nation, the Red River Métis. Are there currently any initiatives underway, whether it's with the IPCAs or broadly, to collaborate in bison rehabilitation?
I can touch on that one, Minister Goodon. Yeah. So the MMF actually owns a modest sized bison herd, actually. So we have that herd. It's more of a domestic herd, bit of a hybrid between the plains bison and the woodland bison. But it's an opportunity to basically harvest a culturally appropriate food source, as well as disperse it to our elders. So that's definitely a priority. But yeah, it's definitely not kind of the wild bison, but more of a domestic species that we can use for educational purposes and kind of, yeah, having basically meat kind of dispersed to our elders. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Riley. And feel free, folks from the audience, to put your questions in the chat. Justine, you had put one in here. I'm pulling up. Other than welcoming collaboration with neighboring Indigenous nations, does MMF have other partners, or is it pursuing additional partners with NGOs, for example, civil society organizations, academia, so on and so forth? What kind of other partnerships have you been crafting?
Yeah, I guess I could speak to both IPCA areas. So in the Thompson region, we've really formed a working relationship with Parks Canada, as well as some of academia in there, kind of as uses kind of guides and insight, providing insight on wildlife and proposed kind of monitoring and study designs in that area. For the Thompson region, IPCA, we're also working with the Métis master's student, and he's providing support on some additional analysis in the area that's looking at the history of burns in the area, as well as caribou migration patterns. And those are some of the features that are going into our boundary delineation, along with traditional land use and items like that. Yes, in the Kettle Hills IPCA area, we've sent out engagement letters to the local First Nations, and as well as we are working with Nature United on, like Jessica was saying, they're a flora and fauna monitoring plan, and that hopefully will come out in the summer, and we can get on the land and teach some citizens how to monitor some species in that area.
I'll just jump in here real quickly. I believe that University of Saskatchewan is involved with us a little bit in the north as well. I would say that there's been some interest in other angles to like Nature Conservancy. I know Don Carr, who's working there now, has reached out a couple of times and to me, because we met each other through the pathway work. But that's something I should probably chat with Riley and Jessica about to see if there's some ways that we can partner. But there's lots of, and of course, Eli has a bottomless ability to reach out to these people from all over the world. And I think Riley and Jessica, we need to talk to him offline as well about potentials for not-for-profits to be a part of what we're doing here.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, the government funding, whether it's in the Métis situation or First Nations across Canada, the government funding is very helpful impetus to get things happening, but inevitably we have to shore that up with other resources. So I've got a follow-up question on the bison discussion, question from Michelle here. Is there a way for folks to support the herd in terms of buying meat, or is it more controlled, like the way the meat gets distributed, I guess, or what's the name of the herd or such?
Yeah, so the herd actually recently went through, we recently moved them from a farm. So they're originally in Rosa, Manitoba, and we moved them to Richard, Manitoba, and they're actually at a Métis-owned bison ranch called Ironhead Bison Ranch. And we've really been focusing on getting our herd up to a more of a management phase. So before, when they were in Rosa, we had more of a bull, kind of like an even proportion of bulls to cows. So now we've kind of transferred to a more a cow-calf herd. Yeah, so in terms of funding to support the bison, that's interesting. I could maybe look into that. I haven't really actually thought about that yet, but yeah, no, I'll circle back on our end and see if there's a potential opportunity for that.
Currently, how many head of bison approximately do you figure? Yeah,
so we had a number of calves this year. So usually it's a herd that's kind of rotated through crops. So they're kind of hard to count when they're in the trees, but we're going to be basically just herding them all up and putting them through the facilities to give them their shots and their boosters. And so it's about 16 currently. So, but we'll know certainly this winter.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Such a powerful symbol of, you know, and then just a follow-up thought on that. I recently saw a blurb on a respected national news outlet citing the big dust up in the great central plains of North America in like the dirty 30s and such as a symptom of climate change. And I just kind of fell out of my chair, because I think if you look a little bit deeper, the plow up of the indigenous grasses, that the bison and the bison grass was such a ancient ecosystem, and symbiotic connection between the bison and the ecology of the whole central plains of this continent. You know, and so it's easy to try and write off that as climate change, but really it was the disruption of governance and management of Indigenous peoples of those lands, and replacing Indigenous grass with wheat crops, replacing bison with cattle. Anyways, I get a little hot under the scarf when I start getting into that, but another question here from the crowd. Haley asks, could you elaborate on the kinds of legal protections that are being explored, as that was identified as a priority for citizens?
Yeah, so that was a question that we included in our in-person engagement sessions, as well as our virtual IPCA online survey, and kind of getting an idea from citizens on what type of governance and management system they would like in these IPCAs. And I feel like that work is still underway, and that's something that we are going to be validating at that kind of updating, or that kind of next summer kind of validation meeting, where we're presenting on what we've heard through our engagement sessions and as well as online, and then have more concrete next steps in terms of kind of management and governance systems. And when we started our IPCA initiative, we did those interviews with other Indigenous nations and got a sense of different kind of legal protection mechanisms, whether it's federal, provincial. So that's something that we're going to be incorporating into this validation meeting to see like what legal protection fits the best for these two protected areas.
One thing I'll add there, just as a bit of a bridging from contributions that Will made in the ICE process, is the importance of first and foremost founding IPCAs on Indigenous laws. So in this case, Métis laws, and that they're well founded there first and foremost, which you know, many legal scholars, and I think of Dr. John Burrows from the Indigenous law faculty at the University of Victoria. He talks about how Canadian law and Indigenous laws are parallel, separate, but interconnected legal traditions that are connected through Section 35 of the Canada Act of 1982. And the Métis, of course, have that same protection of their rights and, of course, responsibilities. And so one of our lawyers who did the Mears Island court case here on the West Coast, Jack Woodward, was interviewed in recent years about the legal standing of such IPCA type initiatives, and said that a good way to understand that is to think of them as constitutional parks, and it's through those constitutional agencies that we have to. But then, of course, you bridge into provincial laws, and how then do you collaborate with provinces and other legal orders? Got another question here. Sorry if I missed this, but what is the governance decision-making process on management actions and boundaries? So this was fleshed out a little bit through the surveys, and I don't think it's written in stone at this point, but you're kind of evolving. But if you want to take a swing at that one, Riley or Jessica or Will, go for it.
Yeah, in terms of kind of governance and management, that's still kind of underway. But some of the work that we have done on that is I showed a diagram in my presentation on towards the left. You have more a government, or I guess a government governed IPCA, and then on to the right it's more an Indigenous governed IPCA, and we looked at kind of the pros and cons with both, and presented that to the citizens, and yeah, that's something we're hoping to flush out at our validation meeting and get some clear kind of next steps. And same with boundaries, that was kind of in there as well, and kind of, as I mentioned, still a little more research and background going into the delineating of the boundaries of these IPCAs.
Awesome. So I'm told by Justine that we have a question from somebody in the audience who's raised their hand. And so I believe we're going to unmute them, Justine, rather, to ask the question here.
Hi guys, my name is Michael Westlake. I work for Environment and Climate Change Canada, and I'm a strategic advisor, a strategic sort of program advisor for our IPCA and our T1C program. I first of all want to thank you, like every single one of you, for the kind of the amazing work that you guys have put into this project. It's absolutely astonishing. I have a question that it's applicable to your program, but I think it applies across like a real sort of broad base. And my question is, what kind of barriers has this project seen in moving kind of this particular IPCA forward?
For Will.
I'm going to jump in here real quickly because this is, and then I'm going to let Jessica and Riley talk about some specifics. But yes, they're maybe not specifically on this, but I'm going to go a little bit broader and go back a few years. When after the pathway sort of wrapped up some of its reports with the ICE report and the National Advisory Panel report and a few others, there was a fund that was set up by Canada. And there was, first of all, there was no Indigenous specific portion that was set aside. And for sure, there was no Métis specific funding set aside within that. Not sure why, because Eli will remember this, that I pound on the table. Don't forget about us. We need distinctions based. It's not, you can't just check off the Indigenous box that the Métis Nation has to be involved, Inuit have to be involved. And that seemed to fall on deaf ears on whoever created that fund in the first place. So we applied. I believe that there was 6 applications that were applied and 0 were funded. Of course, I was quite upset about it. Called up the minister herself, and we were able to get funding to do some exploratory work, some development work. And that's where we're at right now. Now, since then, we obviously have done some amazing work, and I have to, I'm also blown away by the stuff that our team has been doing, and I am so happy because it just proves to me, and I hope it proves to Canada, that the Métis belong at this table. A couple of years ago, before COVID, we went to a conference in Quebec City, and I brought along a prop with me, and that was an 8-ball. And I stood up, Eli probably remembers this, I stood up in front of the crowd, and I put the 8-ball on the floor. And I said, the Métis Nation isn't behind the 8-ball. And I walked off the stage. I walked to the back of the room. If I could have walked out the door, I think I would have done that too. I said, this is where the Métis Nation is. We're not even on the pool table. We're not even in the stand where you stack the pool balls. We're not even in this game. And that's that. I was being completely literal about that, because that is where we were. Now, fast forward, to where we are, and you look at what the team has done, which is absolutely incredible, amazing. And I hope that it proves that we were, it was a mistake to leave the Métis Nation out. Today, I think things are better. And I think because of the work that has been done in the community, in the department, at the local level, I think those things are very evident now. And I want to say thanks again to the organizers of this, because this forum helps us get our name on the on the work that needs to be done, and I'm really excited about that. Now, going back to some of the impediments that are get in our way, and IPCC took a while for them to figure this out. Distinctions-based funding is absolutely vital for the Métis to be involved in this. What distinctions-based means is that there's funding set aside for First Nations projects, Inuit projects, and Métis Nation projects. Now at the same time, there needs to be readiness, so if there is a Métis organization in British Columbia who's not ready, we understand that they're not ready. But if you look at the Métis Nation and the Red River Métis, and that's who we're representing here, we are ready. We have been ready for a long time, but I think we've proven that now. But when these programs are developed, that you have to remember, and I've been pounding on this for 10 years. Eli was probably sick of me saying these things. Distinctions-based has to happen. And we are, the MMF, the Red River Métis, are the leaders, quite frankly, right across the Métis homeland. And we can help others, even though, like, you probably heard some of the issues that are happening internally, but we will support people who want to protect and put conservation first. But that to me is some of the bigger picture things that we've struggled with. And to be quite honest, it was hurtful when those things happened at that time. And I probably took it more personally than I should have. But now I think we're at a much different place. And I think, again, this kind of venue allows us the opportunity to show that we belong at the adults table. Anyways, I'm going to ask Riley and Jessica to kind of just jump in there on more specifics, but that's, I wanted to jump in and appreciate that question very much. Thank you.
Just as you're gathering your thoughts there, Riley and Jessica, I want to just add a little bit of nuance to Will's observation there. And, it was personal because we all invested our hearts and, our whole lives in that pathway process in good faith. This is really a really important point, that we tested the waters of good faith. In our relationship with Parks Canada, in our relationship with other members of the ICE committee. And we really then allowed ourselves, once we found that good faith was present in the first phase of the pathway, we allowed ourselves to let our whole life slip into that. And so it was very deeply personal. One of the things I've digested over the years, like Will, I was upset with the change from Parks Canada to the Canadian Wildlife Service. Nothing against any of the people at CWS. They're all lovely people, and I know folks are on the call today from that organization. But what we collectively experienced was a major relational setback, and the lack of funding for the Métis Nation in the first, with the Challenge Fund, was a symptom of that frustration in the relationship. And, barring any ill will from the changes that were made, I kind of chalk it up partly to the dysfunctionality of bureaucracy, which seems to be almost unavoidable. That we deal with a new crop of folks from a different agency and their setbacks in relationship. This happens all the time at the kind of local level, whether you're dealing with like a RCMP detachment, or whether it's a ground level Parks Canada, superintendent, or what have you. It's this rotating of people, and then the disruption of those relationships that becomes a major barrier. And we're talking about something that's not a 3-year project here or like a 2-year project. This is going to take all hands on deck and a sustained effort to churn this boat around from the collision course that we're on. Our elders have seen a huge decline of biodiversity on the land, and it's happening right now. And it's, feels like it's happening in slow motion because we experience time so strangely as humans, but it's quite abrupt when you take a bigger step back and see the loss that's been happening on the land. Now I'm going down a rabbit hole with you, Will, but I see Michael's raised his hand again, but I want to give Riley and Jessica a chance to reflect on some of the barriers that they've encountered, and then we'll get Michael back unmuted.
Yeah. So working as kind of a technical level staff on the IPCA initiative, I can provide some kind of specific kind of technical barriers that we found. So one, COVID's definitely been a barrier. Kind of as you've seen, these areas are remote. So in some instances, when restrictions were a little lighter, we were able to have a virtual meeting with our Thompson region, but all the citizens had to come into the regional office and social distance to have that discussion. So getting the feedback that we need to move forward on these IPCAs, that's been a challenge during COVID. And then the second one is more related to a land title issue. So in Manitoba, there's a lack of a public land title database that kind of outlines fee simple private crown land in Manitoba. We currently use an RM map kind of designation. So basically the RMs of a certain area have to update this map that outlines crown land. So we can't go online and outline, oh, this is crown land, this is private land. That's only in certain areas. So we've had to devote quite a bit of time of mapping out land titles in the Kettle Hills IPCA. And that really helps for governance next steps as well as management next steps, and also kind of delineating those boundaries, because you need to know kind of what is this agriculture crown land, is this private land. So that was a bit of a barrier for the Kettle Hills IPCA as well.
Thanks for those insights. Yeah, right across the board, COVID-19 did a number on us, but we got stick-to-itiveness. Jessica, is there anything you want to add in there?
Not much. I am the newest face on this project, so Riley knows everything that I know. I could add that these virtual workshops that we've been able to adjust and collect the information despite COVID do present barriers to a lot of people. A lot of people aren't comfortable with online forums, and also don't have access to reliable internet or technology in order to get onto the internet. So that's a huge one. And then of course the land, just finding a beautiful layer for GIS that shows us where things are and aren't is a bit of a challenge. So
Gotcha.
Yeah,
good insights. Thank you for sharing that. Michael, you got your digits back up there.
There we go. I'm unmuted. I really respect your honesty, and it's probably the most important thing to move sort of IPCAs forward. And I'm sorry that I've dug up an old wound and stuff like that, but to me it's all about moving things forward. It's not about focusing on the past, and there's been some something is actually, Riley, you brought something to my attention, which is very important. And that is probably the need, and we have highlighted in our group, of having understanding of where, there is forestry, there is mining, where there's GIS sort of mapping, exercise, comes to fruition, because there is, barriers such, I probably used the wrong word in a barrier perspective, but there are certain things that would enable IPCAs to become more sort of fruitful when we're moving forward. And I really appreciate, like I said, your honesty, and I appreciate caring for these discussions.
Yeah, the bear.
Sorry,
go
Eli,
ahead.
if there's one thing I'm known for is like telling how I feel. So my apologies if I was too honest, but I do think it's important that we all understand. And, you know, that's why I did that illustration with the 8-ball. I don't think it was well received at the time, but it didn't matter to me because my job is to protect the Métis Nation, is to serve the Métis Nation, and to do the very best I can for the Métis Nation. That's what I was elected to do. And so if there's times when I'm a little too pushy in what I think needs to be done, I'm not sure I apologize for that, but I do appreciate the question extremely, and the opportunity to talk and to have a really good dialogue about those things that didn't work and what we're doing now that is working, and working with all the stakeholders, including ECCC. So thanks again, I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I was going to joke around about the bear was sleeping and then Michael went in there, poked him with a stick. But, you know, and I agree, Michael, like we don't want to dwell in the past, but we also have to learn from the past and make sure that we don't recommit those same mistakes, like a rotating door of recidivism is the word I want to say. And that's, you know, and we're not going to, you know, put all the onus, and this is one of the things, if any of you probably at the Métis locals or wherever, like at Chief and Council, in my experience serving my own Chief and Council, you know, we, and it's not limited to us, you know, it's right across the board. If you're elected into an important position, there's a tendency for people to say, well, now you've got to solve all our problems. And they just pile them up and, you know, come to council meetings and there's one more thing I want to add for your thing. Well, the reality is that, you know, in former times, if you're out on a canoe journey, everyone's got a paddle. And if you're not paddling, you should be clearing the water out with the scooper. In the Chilcotin, they do pack trips where they get on their horses and they bring all their supplies and they go out on the land and they go from spot to spot throughout, traveling through history, basically, and the past, the stories from the elders. And it becomes very apparent if somebody's not helping to take down or set up tents or not pulling their weight around the camp. And, you know, my point here is that for all of our societies, I don't think this is limited to just Indigenous peoples. We all have a responsibility to contribute to moving that forward. And you know, what we're doing, and Will and I have been off and on connecting about this, but creating a Métis IPCA Innovation Center, maybe somewhere in southwestern Manitoba, perhaps, because to do just that, Michael, to sustain, regardless of the ups and downs of government officials and bureaucracies that come and go, to have these innovation centers as lasting support systems to support these IPCAs, so that when the funding or the mandate disappears, the you know, it doesn't just drop off the face of the earth, that we are able to keep and maintain that good work that folks like Riley and Jessica and others are doing. I've been asked to wrap up by 11:50 my time. I'm in British Columbia, so that's 5 minutes from now. And maybe as I'm doing that, I didn't see any other burning questions. I saw a bunch of thank yous, and I'll echo those thanks to Minister Goodon and Riley and Jessica. Again, I'm just so impressed by the capacity that you folks have. And I will do a little plug just as I get ready to pass the feather back over to Justine, and I invited Will to this, and hopefully he can make it time in his agenda. But on this upcoming weekend, the 12th to the 14th, the IISAAK OLAM Foundation, together with the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, is co-hosting a Valentine's Zagimduin online celebration and discussion series. There's going to be several big announcements made. One of them very exciting around the future funding of IPCAs and creative mechanisms to shore up government contributions that have been made and will continue to be made. And also something that we're really excited about at the IISAAK OLAM Foundation related to the Earthshot Prize. It's one of the world's most prestigious environmental awards. It's just kicked off last year. It's they distribute £5 million per year for over the next 10 years, the decisive decade. So the first year went by last year, and then there's 9 more, and they're given out to 5 different award winners, £1 million each. And so we're going to be making an announcement this weekend about that. But also, not to stir the bear too much, but we're going to have a love-based conversation about Indigenous identity. This, for those of you who are connected to the CRP, this has been an issue recently where one of our own people, close, long-standing ally, has been accused in the public sphere of Indigenous identity theft. And after the stuff that happened with that Barassa lady and such, and this is an ongoing iteration, and Will mentioned it earlier in his comments, that Indigenous identity theft is an issue. And when we were discussing it over the Christmas holidays, we were encouraged by Dr. John Burroughs to walk the talk of Zagimduin, which is this Anishinaabe concept of love that focuses on abundance. And how can we invoke those Indigenous principles and values in conversations, not only around economic diversification and land stewardship, but in our human relations and how we approach such sensitive issues such as identity. Because the reality is that there's a lot of shrapnel and a lot of collateral damage of the genocidal policies and practices of governments, and a lot of innocent bystanders, and it's confusing for many people. So this is why we're having that conversation on Valentine's Day. I think Christy put in the chat a link. We're making this year a free event for the Valentine's Day Zagimduin. You can make a donation if you're so inclined, but otherwise just stop in and listen in to bright minds like Will Goodon talking more in depth with myself and others. So yeah, thank you again to all of you for your great work and for sharing with all of us. And I'm wrapping up as told a minute before 11:50. Christy and/or Jessica, do you want to take it from here? Justine, sorry.
Thanks, Eli. Yes. Wow, what a wonderful and informative dialogue. Big thank you to all of our panelists for sharing about Red River Métis culture and identity, and how Kettle Hills and Thompson Region IPCAs can support the continuation of Red River Métis culture. It was really interesting to learn about the work of the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Red River Métis to protect the blueberry patch, as well as the caribou and other species and places, especially in the context of ongoing external threats and cumulative impacts, which I think is a challenge that some other IPCAs are also up against. And it was just really inspiring to hear about these initiatives and the work that you're doing to engage community members in your work. And so we wish you all the best in your initiatives moving forward. So before I turn it over to Joan Church, again, for a closing, for which we're really grateful for, I just wanted to thank again our panelists, Minister Goodon, Riley Bartel, and Jessica Lagimodière, and our moderator, Eli Enns. So on behalf of the CRP, the IISAAK OLAM Foundation, and the Manitoba Métis Federation, I extend a big thank you to all of the audience and participants for spending this time with us as we learn about Red River Métis IPCAs. We'd also like to extend our gratitude to Environment and Climate Change Canada for supporting this webinar, as well as for supporting the IPCA Stories Project, which is an initiative that the IISAAK OLAM Foundation is leading in collaboration with partners like the Manitoba Métis Federation. And lastly, I just want to remind everyone again that this webinar is part of the virtual campfire series, which is a webinar series hosted by the Conservation Through Reconciliation Partnership, or CRP. So you can sign up for updates on future webinars on the CRP's webpage. And we have 2 webinars coming up in March that we're excited about, and they'll be posted soon. One features women leaders and leadership in IPCAs, and another one is on Inuit-led conservation initiatives. And we'll also be hosting another webinar on additional examples of Métis-led conservation later this year, so stay tuned. And finally, stay tuned for the launch of a new website that the CRP will be launching in collaboration with IISAAK OLAM Foundation later this year. And this website will be dedicated to resources on Indigenous-led conservation and IPCAs, and it will feature stories such as the Kettle Hills and Thompson region IPCAs. So thank you again to each and every one of you, and we wish you a very good day and week ahead. And it's my pleasure to now invite Joan Church up again to do a closing for us. So thank you so much, Joan. Looks like you're looking for the mute button, maybe, Joan.
Senior moment.
Thanks.
Okay, I want to thank you, Creator. We want to thank you. We want to thank you for this opportunity to get together as stewards and warriors, taking care of our lands. We ask that as we move forward, you guide us and strengthen us in becoming kind and considerate warriors and stewards. Miigwech, keep all of our people safe and healthy. And Creator, if you could just take a moment out of your very busy day and get rid of this COVID, it would be so appreciated. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Joan. Have a great day,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.